Guardian of the seasons, keeper of every time, tune us so to your rhythms that we may know the occasion for stillness and the moment for action. May we be so prepared, so aware, so awakened in our waiting, that when you prompt us into motion, our hands may be your hands, and our purposes your own. Amen. This is our call to worship for this fifth Sunday of Easter. I'm Pastor Rielly with Windsor Mennonite Fellowship. There's a fascinating local story here in Windsor and Detroit about Michigan Central Station. If you've lived in Windsor for very long, you might be familiar with the old abandoned train depot as you travel over the Ambassador Bridge on the right-hand side of us. It's a tall stone structure that is beautiful, but also a sign of the economic struggles of our communities. Windsor and Detroit, though two different countries, our destinies are tied together. Industry and community has linked us in a way where we need each other. Now, Michigan Central Station experienced a decline over the 20th century. It went from a thriving transportation hub to an abandoned stone building that was filled with graffiti. All its older artifacts were looted. In particular, one of its most prized possessions, a giant clock in the center of the station, was stolen. Just a few years ago, it was announced that the Ford Motor Company had purchased Michigan Central Station and was now beginning to rebuild it. Upon this announcement, they received an anonymous tip that this giant clock that had been missing for 20 years is being returned. They were given a specific address on an obscure street in Detroit. And when they went there, lo and behold, carefully wrapped in blankets, was the original Michigan Central Station clock. It had been restored, it had been worked on, and there were specific instructions about how to take care of it and how to return it to its rightful place. This clock thief took the clock from the station, wanting to make sure that it was preserved until the time when the station could be rebuilt. This clock thief valued time so much that they took care of this clock for 20 years until it can be returned to its rightful owner and properly taken care of. This local story reminds me about what I would like to talk to you about today. What it means to treat time as sacred. Time is something that's on all our minds right now. There's a lot of discussion about lifting the quarantine. The discussions and sometimes arguments revolve around time. When is the right time? Many people are feeling restless. They're hitting their limits with this quarantine, and people want to get back to their lives. Time is becoming an oppressor in some ways. It's making us anxious. We are restless. But I'd like to ask you for a moment to consider something maybe unusual. What is your relationship with time itself? Yes, I think we have a relationship with time. We perceive time in certain ways. And how we perceive time snowballs into how we live our lives. So for you, is time sacred and precious like this clock keeper? Is it holy? Is it full of meaning? Is time a spiritual reality? Is it a place where you can perceive the presence of God in the world and in yourself? Or is time stressful, anxious, and filled with dread? Is it fearful as time ticks by? Or maybe for you, time is commodified. How am I spending my time, we say? That economically, time has been taken over as a currency to spend or withhold. Is your relationship with time oppressive? Is it stolen? Or maybe it's painful. Time means pain for you. Or maybe time is slipping away, slipping out of your fingers. Or maybe time for you feels rushed. Or maybe time crawls. The Jewish theologian and academic Abraham Joshua Heschel has a great way of articulating this. He says in his book, The Sabbath, time to us is sarcasm, a slick, treacherous monster with a jaw like a furnace, incinerating every moment of our lives. It's pretty descriptive. What is your view of time? Is it good or is it bad? And I think either is understandable. I'm not making a value judgment. A moment in time can be beautiful and profound, or it can be brutal and treacherous. Right now, what is your relationship with time? You know the cliche, time heals all wounds? I think that's wrong. I've discovered that time is not a healer. Time is a revealer. I've learned this from being a chaplain to men that have served time in prison. When men are released, I get to meet them at the local train station and welcome them home. Some of these men have done 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 plus years behind bars. And I get the privilege of inviting them back into the community again after doing what they call doing time. And their perspective, I've learned, on time is different than anyone else I know. And this leads us to our local place today, the old Windsor, Essex jail in Sandwich Town, in a neighborhood in West Windsor. It's strange having a jail in the middle of a residential neighborhood. I lived down the street for a couple of years, and I drive by amongst all family houses and kids running around, and nope, there's the Windsor jail. And the thing that was strange about it is because I visited men there. I saw inside, I saw what it was like, and it is not a pleasant place. No jail or prison is nice, but this particular jail is a dark hellhole. Officially called the Essex County Jail, was constructed by the Mackenzie brothers in 1855. Sadly, there were even executions here from 1909 to 1943. Men condemned to death by hanging. This small jail housed up to 138 inmates at one time, not only double bunked, but triple bunked and quadruple bunked. It's medieval and draconian as an environment that detains people made in the image of God. There's been a number of times where I've actually come here to visit men that have breached their conditions and had to go back to prison. I've been jammed in these small little meeting rooms with nothing but a little blue button beside my head if something goes wrong that I could press and get some help. Thankfully, I never needed to press the button, but I did feel an overwhelming sense of claustrophobia and stress, as sometimes I waited an hour for them to get an inmate that I could meet with and hug and pray with. See, the more I listened to former inmates over the years, the more I learned about this thing called time. Many of them describe these profound, holy moments in these dark, miserable places, like this small little meeting room / cell that I was locked in, waiting for an inmate to come and chat with me. God suddenly came to many men I know in the darkest places on earth, the most miserable places on earth. God met them where no one else could find them, and time suddenly stood still. Suddenly a hellhole was transformed into holy ground. If God can work with time in the same way as these inmates, maybe it can happen with me here, especially during a quarantine. Abraham Joshua Heschel says that the higher goal of life with God is not to amass a wealth of information, but to face sacred moments. See, the biblical writers had a complex and nuanced understanding of the holiness in time. For example, in the book of Genesis, in the creation story, the creation poem that we know well, and God said, verse 14 of chapter 1, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years." Have you marked off sacred times? Is time simply something that passes by? Or do you give yourself to discovering sacred moments within the time that you have? This goes back all the way to the creation of the world. That God created the seasons and the days and nights, that time would be sacred. In Psalm chapter 90, verse 12, the writer says, "Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom." That somehow, in treating every day as sacred, we grow in wisdom. Well, what is wisdom? Wisdom is living skillfully in the world. That part of the spiritual mandate is that we become people of wisdom. In numbering the days, we grow in wisdom. Now, in the New Testament, there's actually 3 different types of time that are used. The first Greek word that we see for time is the word chronos. This is what they call literal time. It is linear. Imagine a line. Chronos time is measured time. It's sequential. It's often seen as a commodity. We either have it or we don't have it. It's related to our egos. We build up a sense of self over time through our accomplishments and through our possessions. It's also where we get the word chronic, like having an illness that's persisting for a very long time. This is the word for literal time, chronos. The second word that's used in the New Testament is the word kairos. This is what they call symbolic time. It represents seasons and cycles and events and holidays. Like today, it's Mother's Day. That's a kairos time. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. I love you. It shows up in festivals, celebrations, rituals, and moments in the Bible that are known as kairos moments. But kairos moments are also moments of disruption. COVID-19 is a kairos moment. When Jesus came and taught the kingdom of God is at hand, that was a kairos moment. It was a disruption in the systems and structures of the empire. Kairos moments are when there comes a time to change, a time to grow. Something isn't working anymore. Maybe your beliefs have changed. People often think they're losing their faith when their beliefs no longer can hold the experiences and thoughts that they're having, when in fact it is a kairos moment of disruption that's taking you deeper into your faith, not away from it. It is a maturing, not a losing, if you're open to the process. Kairos moments are when we get to know ourselves. And hopefully during the quarantine, you've had some of these moments where you get to learn something new about yourself that maybe you didn't know before. So there's chronos time that's linear, like the line. There's kairos time, which is like the dots on that line. Moments, significant moments along the journey of life. But then there is another kind of time, and it's aeon time. And it is what they call timelessness. So if you're not already confused, I'm just going to throw this extra thing in there for you. Aeon means eternity, and it is non-linear. Sometimes it means an indeterminate duration, kind of like an age of time. So if you think of chronos time as the line, kairos time as the moments along that line, aeon time is all around it, through it and around it, and so much bigger than it. It is non-linear. What I would like to suggest is that our culture is obsessed with chronos time, but it hasn't always been this way. An industrialized society has turned time exclusively into a linear commodity, and as a result, it has become much more chronic. Our sense of kairos and aeon time is becoming less and less meaningful in our lives. But they are essential realities for our thriving and for our interconnectedness. So there's this story about Jesus. And he's walking with his actual brothers, his family. And they don't believe that he's the Messiah. If my younger brother told me he's the Messiah, I don't know if I would believe him either. Probably pulling my leg. And they didn't believe Jesus. And so in a moment of sarcasm, they suggest that Jesus goes to a festival in the town, the Feast of Booths, and do some kind of public miracle so that he can prove himself, and then everyone will know that he's the Messiah. And then Jesus says something fascinating to his brothers. And in the Gospel of John, chapter 7, verse 6, Jesus says, "My time has not yet come, but your time is always here." Now, the word that Jesus uses for time is the word kairos, that symbolic time, that moment where everything can change. So let that sink in for a moment. Jesus says to us that your time is always here. In the passage, Jesus was waiting to reveal that he is the Messiah. And he had a plan, a strategy. People were looking to kill him. And so his time was not yet, but he says to us that your time is always present. He puts it back on his brothers. The moment of disruption, the moment of change, the moment of growth. Sacred moments are always in front of you. It's just whether or not we notice. That even in the darkest corners of life, in segregation, in hellholes on earth, in our very own city, like at this Windsor jail, God can meet us in those places. What is your relationship with time? This is why the church historically has a calendar. We're on a different time than our culture. When we say it's the 5th Sunday of Easter, or we say that it's Lent, or Advent, or Pentecost, or Holy Week, this is a way of saying that we are not on the watch of capitalism. Christians have always run on a different clock. And in a way, it's resisting the injustices of our day. That Christians throughout the ages have said that we will not be defined by the same energy that oppresses our world. So I think it's important to redeem chronos time even, that linear idea of time. And I think the scriptures give us tools for that. It's important to redeem chronos time and to become increasingly aware of aeon time and to use imagination and intentionality and practices to help us nurture a sense of sacred time. For example, can you create, as Jesus says, your time is always here, you can create kairos time for yourself, sacred moments. Over history, there's been many different prayer forms like fixed time prayer, or the divine hours, or the examen, or Lectio Divina. These are all time-tested practices that help a person enter into kairos time with themselves, with God, and with themselves, and with creation, and even one another. We can also consider treating each other's time as sacred, not misusing the time of other people. It can be a simple act of love to treat other people's time as sacred and important. Giving your time is an act of love. You can give someone a call right now and you can check on them. That is your kairos moment. You can bring the sacredness, Jesus has empowered you to bring the sacredness of each moment into the present by acting out his command to love your neighbor. Other things that you could try is mapping the sacred moments in your past. Recently, I mapped out a timeline of my losses and griefs. And so I drew a meandering road. And I started back as early as I can remember of different losses that I've experienced. And as time went on, it started to flow. And yeah, in some ways it was painful. But in other ways, it was insightful. I got to see the different moments of time in my life as these kairos moments of change. And then I also got to see how God had been healing me and preparing me. So it doesn't have to be just a map of your losses and grief. It could be a map of your joys. It could be a map of the different kinds of things that you've experienced in your life that you're grateful for, sacred moments, and valuing time as something holy. Because, my friends, we can see time as also a gift of God, and that's aeonic time. That time is mysterious. Timelessness is so vast and beyond anything that we can imagine. And it transcends the limited linear time that we all live in. And as I think about this, I realize that time itself is a gift from God. So in reflection, some questions. Is your chronos time starting to get in the way of having sacred moments? Maybe there needs to be a rebalancing. Another question to consider. What does aeon time or eternal time mean for your chronos and kairos time? What matters in the light of eternity? What matters in the light of timelessness? The place that God dwells and will carry on long after our society goes to dust and we die. That eternal life carries on. What matters now in relation to that kind of time? Can you sit with yourself when everything stops, when time slows down? Who are you? When you're not producing, when you're not doing things, when you're not working, when you're not with your family, when you're not with your loved ones, when you're just with yourself. Who are you? I'm not a pastor, I'm a person. You're not your profession. You're a person made in the image of God who is beloved. So when everything stops, maybe your Kairos moment can allow God to speak into you how precious and holy you are on this Mother's Day. Mother's Day can be a great source of pain for many people because maybe they weren't able to become a mother, a biological mother. Or maybe they've lost their mother to death. Or maybe they weren't the mother that they thought they would be, and they've made mistakes. Or maybe they're someone who had a bad mother, someone who was cruel in their life that was their mother. And so this Mother's Day thing is a painful time. But maybe the Kairos moment of Mother's Day can be divested from its commercialism and cliches and can help anyone that feels wounds around Mother's Day or grief or joy. You are not just a mother, you are a person. You are so much more than a function in this world. And then maybe we can celebrate the good things and the gifts that God gives us during our Chronos time on earth. God is with you through all time. Chronos, Kairos, and Aeon. We will never be lost in time. God meets with us along the way of the timelines of our lives. As we close this time together, I'd invite you to consider that it is a miracle that you exist. Your time alive is precious and sacred. The time that you have with others is precious and sacred. Time isn't just a commodity to build up before someone's gone or before you're gone. Time is an opportunity to sit with the disruptions, to see what they have to teach us about ourselves, to savor beautiful moments, to listen to the echoes of eternity calling out to us to respond to God's guidance through our lives, and to rest in that moment, not to be caught up in the shame of the past or worry about the future, but to be still here and now and receive God in the present. It's tough to be held, to let ourselves be loved or cared for if we cannot receive what the present moment has to offer us. This is holiness in time, my friends. Time that I've learned about from spending time with people who have done time. And I hope that you've appreciated this too as we explore this local place that at first is dark and sad, but I've learned has moments of light and eternity that have broken through even the darkest walls. So I'd like to send you now with the words of the psalmist, that they may settle in your hearts and minds and give you strength for your day. Psalm 31. In you, O Lord, I seek refuge. Do not let me ever be put to shame. In your righteousness, deliver me. Incline your ear to me, rescue me speedily. Be a rock and refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me. You are indeed my rock and my fortress. For your name's sake, lead me and guide me. Take me out of the net that is hidden for me, for you are my refuge. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. My times are in your hand. Deliver me from the hand of my enemies and persecutors. Let your face shine upon your servant. Save me in your steadfast love. Go in peace now. to love and serve the Lord.